Over the last couple of weeks, my LJ has started the dreaded death wobble. This violent shaking is a terrible experience if you've ever felt it before. While I was out on the trail recently, I took a video of the suspension, and in that video I noticed the relative movement of the LJ's track bar ball joint. In today's video I'm going to stop this death wobble by replacing the track bar as well as the rod ends on all my steering linkages. Just take a note while watching this video, I refer to ball joints, which is the rod end joint itself. Ball joints are commonly used to describe the top and bottom of the axle C-section in industry, so just don't get confused if you're speaking to anyone. Alright, so we saw in the footage that this ball joint here has got a lot of play in it, so we're going to go and replace this ball joint today. At the same time you can see that the boot on this ball joint here has split, so we're going to go ahead and replace this ball joint. And seeing that we're going to be replacing these two ball joints, we're going to actually continue right on and replace this ball joint as well as these two steering ball joints on this side, this one here and this one over here. So we're going to replace all ball joints on the front end today. So to replace the ball joints, what we have to do is we've got to remove this cotter pin. We'll just bend it and remove it with a pair of pliers. We'll then undo the nut at the top end, and then we'll use a pickle fork between the arm and the ball joint to drop out the ball joint. And that will be the exact same process for all of the ball joints throughout the system. We're going to go ahead and remove those all, and then we will catch up once we've got the suspension arms all out. While you're watching, would you consider subscribing to our channel? Your subscription helps us to keep making videos for you. Alright, so we've encountered the first problem of the day. The bolt that holds the track bar on, this one over here, somebody has put a normal nut in at the back instead of using the plated nut that's supposed to go in here. And then as you can see the end of the bolt sticking out there, instead of cutting the bolt shorter to allow you to put a wrench in here to hold this, I assume they've just stuck a screwdriver through this opening over here and tightened that bolt up. Which means I can't get that nut undone. So what I'm going to have to do now is grab my sawzall over here, and I'm going to stick the sawzall in, cut through this bush, cut through the bolt, and that will allow me to take that end of the bolt out on this side and pull the bolt out so that I can get my track bar out. So if you are doing this job and you're doing a repair, please make sure that you make a plan for that nut for the next person that has to get it out, so that they don't have to go through what I've got to do next. Alright, so we've now been able to cut that bolt off, and we should now be able to drop this arm out. There we go. Alright, so you can see there's some damage on these mounting surfaces here where the track bar bolts in, and I can feel it on this side. Might be able to see it there. So what I suspect has happened is that because this bolt was not torqued down properly, because you couldn't access the nut on that side, that this was loose, which was allowing that little bit of movement that we saw, and that is our death wobble. So I think I found the cause of the death wobble. This bolt wasn't tightened and it caused some damage on these holes. So I'll ground that down and make sure that when we put the new track bar in, we get it really tight inside of there. Alright, so I cleaned out those surfaces as best I could, but in so doing what I found was that an ordinary 10mm bolt has already wallowed out that mounting at the back there. So I don't want to put a 10mm bolt back in again because I don't like it being that loose, especially in a critical application like this. So what I'm planning on doing is taking out the 10mm bolt and upgrading it to a 7/16 bolt. Now 7/16 bolt is has a diameter of 11.1 millimeters, so it is just a slightly larger hole. So I'm going to go get the drill. I'm going to drill out this hole, and we should be able to leave that hole as is, but we will check as soon as we've got that done. So let me go ahead and drill this out. Then the other thing that I'm going to have to do is slightly modify the bushing in the track bar itself. Alright, so now with the hole filled out, you'll see that this is a much tighter fit. Still a little bit loose, but you can't do a size for size fit, so you need a little bit of play just to get everything aligned, but that is nice and tight. So what I need to do next is I need to design a nut and a holder plate to get that nut in at the rear there. And what I'm going to do is, if you look, I'm going to use a slightly longer bolt and make sure we actually carry on the shank of the bolt. So I need to put a spacer in on the back end, which will allow me to space over the section and make sure that my nut does not bottom out on these threads. So I'm going to put a slightly longer bolt in, spacer, and then I'm going to move my nut backwards slightly and see if I can possibly just catch it with a wrench through this opening. If I cannot catch it with a wrench, then what I'll do is I will just weld a plate onto the nut and allow that plate to stick through this hole like the original design. Alright, so I have to make a new nut plate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this piece of stainless steel, I'm going to drill a hole in it, and then I'm going to actually press this nut into the hole, and once it's in there then I'll TIG weld it. Alright, so now that I've got the hole drilled in the plate, you can see that will be able to be pressed in there. So I'm just going to use the spacer on the top there and stick it in the hydraulic press and press this down, and once it's in there then I'll go and weld it up. Alright, so I've got the mark where I need to cut it. I'll be able to thread it through the slot here. Once it's inside, I'll turn it up straight with the bolt through and it'll catch either on this edge over here or on the inside somewhere when you want to undo it. So I think I have a solution. On the end of the track bar is the bushing, and it has this steel insert inside of it. Now, the steel insert is designed for a 10mm metric bolt. I'm going to be using a 7/16 bolt. So in order to get it to fit in, I have to take this bush and put it on the lathe and drill out the inside of this bushing. Alright, so here you'll see the new track bar next to the original track bar. You'll notice that this new track bar is a larger diameter tube, and that the rod ends over here, look at the difference in diameter between this rod end and this rod end. So the new unit, a lot beefier than the old unit. The old unit was not the OEM unit. Somebody has already put an aftermarket unit in here. So I'm just going to get rid of the old track bar and put this new unit in here. Alright, so the first thing that I did is to measure the center line from the track bar here to the grease zerk on this side over here. Now, my front axle was offset a little bit in the Jeep. It was offset by about 1/2 inch, so I need to move it over about 1/4 of an inch. The exact measurement that I have is 7mm for those of you who work in metric. So what I've done is I've made sure that the new track bar is that 7mm longer than the old track bar, and I'm going to go and install it now and see if we can pull that axle across. Alright, so you can see inside of there I've got the new nut plate on there. I've put a couple of hardened washers behind the nut plate as a spacer to space it out. So this side of the track rod bar is good to go. Alright, so with the other side of the track bar now installed, we can go ahead and put this side in. You'll see I've put some never sees in there, make it easier for the next guy. And if you remember correctly, that my suspension wasn't centered, so you'll see there's a little bit of an offset. For now, I'm just going to pull the frame across and then install the side of the track bar. We've got a new nut that will go on the top. Alright, the next thing I need to do is to torque up the track bar. So I've got various different torques for these fasteners. Some are saying for the axle side 40 foot-pounds. Some references are 55 foot-pounds. I looked up a 7/16 bolt, and it is somewhere between 72 and 60 foot-pounds depending on the friction factor. So I'm going to run the axle side over there to 55 foot-pound, and then for the ball joint side I'm going to run it to 55 foot-pound. Remember that you're putting a cotter pin inside of there, so I'm going to run it to 55 and then continue to tighten until I can fit my cotter pin. Alright, so as Murphy would have it, as I was torquing this up, I've just snapped off the bolt here at the back. You can hear the plate loose there. In fact, let's just take the bolt. You can see there we've just snapped the bolt off. So I'm going to remove the bolt, get another one, and try this again. Alright, so I put the new bolt in there and torqued it off, and it clicked off at 55 foot-pounds. So I'm going to just assume that we had a bad bolt. Alright, so the next thing we need to do is actually swap out this rod end and this rod end. Alright, so just before we take out these old tie rod ends, what we're going to do is we're going to measure from the center of that tie rod end to the center of this tie rod end. And we're going to use that measurement when we put the new rod ends in to make sure that this link is the same length as the old one. Now that's not perfect, so we're still going to take it for a wheel alignment, but at least we'll get it good enough that we can drive it down the road. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to install the ball joint back on this end over here. We're going to torque that up to 55 foot-pounds. We're then going to connect that end to our steering pitman arm over here, and we're going to torque this side up again to 55 foot-pounds. Once we're done with that, we'll then put the remainder of the bars back in. Alright, so we've now installed this link that connects from the steering gear to the right hand side wheel. We're going to go ahead and put the steering damper on and then connect the link that connects up to the left hand side wheel over here. Right, last job I've got to do is I've got to go and install each one of the grease zerks at each of the ball joints. Alright, so we're done. All the joints have been torqued, and where we need cotter pins installed. So next step will be to take it out for a quick test drive, and then as soon as we can get it for wheel alignment so that we can make sure that the lengths are adjusted and wheel alignment is correct.
I took the Jeep in and had the wheel alignment done. The results showed that I could adjust the caster angle a little. As I have not yet had any death wobble with the new rod ends and track bars, I think I'll just leave it the way it is.